ourselves to embrace an ideology which at its core states that all governance is about maximizing corporate profit at the expense of the citizenry. What do we have institutions of state, if not to hold up all the citizenry and especially the most vulnerable? And with the wealth given to us as Americans, we could have eradicated poverty. We could have created a country that was much different than what we have created. And what's happening now is that we are being rapidly reconfigured into a kind of neo-feudal society, an oligarchic society where increasingly the bottom two-thirds of Americans are hanging on by their fingertips. You have a shrinking, diminishing middle class and an elite that is just making obscene amounts of money at our expense. And you can't sustain, first of all, you can't sustain a democracy and an oligarchy. That's not a new idea. Thucydides wrote about that, about ancient Athens. But secondly, they will push and push and push until there is a backlash. And I think part of what we're seeing with the security and surveillance state is a preparation for that backlash. The destruction of civil liberties, which has been brutal. The wholesale surveillance and monitoring of virtually every American citizen, which I think many of us suspected, and Edward Snowden, through his disclosures to Glenn Greenwald at The Guardian, made palpably real. The National Defense Authorization Act, and I sued the president in the Southern District Court of New York, and I won. Where now the Obama administration has appealed it, but this permits the military to seize, arrest American citizens, strip them of due process, and hold them in military detention centers, including our offshore penal colonies in places like Guantanamo or Bagram. And they know what's coming. The NSA has run all sorts of scenarios on economic collapse and especially climate change, and they're preparing. You read Paul Krugman's columns in the New York Times, where he constantly calls for a rational response to the economic crisis. And a rational response would be moratorium on foreclosures and bank repossessions, a forgiveness of student debt, a massive jobs program, rebuilding infrastructure, especially targeted people under the age of 25. That would be rational. But the state doesn't respond rationally because there are no mechanisms, counter mechanisms now to make piecemeal or incremental reform possible, which was the role of the traditional liberal class, and I spend a long time in The Death of the Liberal Class laying this out. And so they keep pushing and pushing and pushing. You're seeing unemployment benefits being taken away. You're seeing Head Start programs being shut down. You're seeing an assault on public education. The Congress can't even cap the student debt at 3%. It's now risen to 6%, while at the same time the Fed is lending trillions of dollars to corporations like Goldman Sachs at virtually 0% interest. And then these financial corporations, especially if you're late on your credit card, are charging us upwards to 30%. I don't know what that is. It's not capitalism. It's extortion. So having spent 2 years writing Days of Destruction, Days of Revolt out of the very poorest pockets of the country with Joe Sacco, and having been in cities like Camden, which per capita is the poorest city in the United States and not surprisingly the most dangerous, something's coming. What will trigger it? It will be benign. It will be a seemingly innocuous event. And more importantly, the liberal institutions have been disemboweled to serve corporate interests. So what the result is that we as citizens have, through the traditional structures of power, been left powerless to respond. The only hope left is to get out in the street and build the kind of mass movements that I saw in countries like East Germany, and we have to recognize that for those of us who care about defending the rights of the underclass, we have to hold fast to the moral imperatives of movements and force power to respond to those movements. Because whether it's Bush or whether it's Obama, Goldman Sachs wins, always. There is no way to vote against the interests of Goldman Sachs. And we have to begin to make the power elite terrified of us. And Occupy did that, by the way. They were terrified of Occupy. And you saw in the election...
Because they thought it would really catch on.
Well,
bigger than it was.
And they had to destroy it. And let's remember who destroyed it. Barack Obama destroyed it.